Hi, in this video I'd like to present and share with you a system of fingering I've developed. And I figure since in the upcoming videos I'll be looking at the chapter in Bach's Versuch über die wahre Art des Klavier zu spielen on fingering, that it would be a good time to share the system of fingering I've developed, so I can then, as we look at what Bach has to say about fingering, that I can compare and contrast my system of fingering with what Bach says. And I'd like to say that I developed this system of fingering completely independently to what Bach has written. I developed this system independently of everybody and everything. So if I compare my system of fingering, which I call the AC fingering, if I compare that to Bach, and wherever there's similarities or where they align the two approaches, they were conclusions that were arrived at independently of each other. And so whatever way my system of fingering satisfies what Bach has to say, it is not because I believed Bach or incorporated what Bach says. I arrived at that same conclusion completely independently. So I think that's worth something. And so my system of fingering, I call it a system of fingering because it is complete. It's governed. You can reduce it down to a core formula. And I'm going to explain that formula now and illustrate how it can be applied. And I'm going to compare it to normal fingering. Now, the logic from which this fingering evolved comes from the characteristics of the fingers, which I'm going to talk about now. Then finger position, the cause of tension, the cause of unevenness, sound, and the nature of music. And aside from the nature of music, I have covered finger position, the cause of tension, cause of unevenness, the golden sound. I have dealt with those in videos, those episode videos. So I would say you could look at them to hear what I've presented as the causes of tension and unevenness, as what makes the golden sound, and the proper finger position that goes with this system of fingering, the AC fingering system. And given that there's only 5 fingers on the hand, the core formula is going to be very simple. So it's not going to be overly complicated. And since with the Alan Cochlin system of fingering, the left and right hand, there's no difference between the two as in terms of applying the formula. Therefore, to begin with, I'll only talk about the right hand. And then I'm going to look at some examples from the revolutionary etude and show how the Alan Cochlin system of fingering is applied, and in doing so I'll then be looking at the left hand. So here it is. This is it drawn out. This is the core, the basic formula which governs the AC fingering system, or the Alan Cochlin fingering. And since I've developed this system of fingering myself, I get to name it. So I've called it the AC fingering, Alan Cochlin fingering, or AC fingering. It's, you know, that's it. So this is the core formula. And the B and the W, that stands for black key and white key. And here's the thumb. W and B stands for white key and black key. And so I'll explain now this formula. So according to the AC fingering system, the thumb, the middle finger, and the little finger are the fingers best able to play white keys. There are no fingers better able to play a white key than the thumb, the middle finger, and the little finger. And the second finger and fourth finger. These two fingers are best able to play black keys. There are no fingers on the hand better at playing black keys than the second finger and the fourth finger. And you can see that here on that on the thumb, the middle finger, and the little finger, there's a W. And on the index finger and the fourth finger, there's a B. There's a B. Okay. So, the middle finger and index finger. The middle finger is best able to play a white key. However, it is almost as good playing a black key, but it is more at home on the white keys. So, and the same goes for the index finger. The index finger is best able to play a black key, but it can play a white key almost as good, although it is slightly more at home on black keys than it is on white keys. Hence, there for the index finger I have a B on top and then the W underneath, representing that the job this finger is best at doing is playing a black key, but it's almost as good playing a white key. And with the middle finger I have the W on top and the B underneath. So it's best at playing white keys, the middle finger, but it's almost as good playing black keys. And so there's a B and W and a W and B on these fingers, because you can use these two fingers on both keys. Now the little finger, according to the Alan Cochlin fingering system, the fourth finger is incapable of playing white keys. It can't do it. And for the sake of the length of the video, I'm not going to try and justify that claim. I'll do that in due course over time. I just want to present this now. So, the fourth finger is incapable of playing white keys. It can't do it. But, according to the AC fingering, it is the best finger of all the fingers at playing black keys. There is no finger stronger or better at playing a black key than the fourth finger. And so with the Alan Cochlin fingering, the use of the fourth key is reserved exclusively for black keys. And that's pretty much a hard and fast rule of this fingering system. There is the only exception would be in the case of chords where it's unavoidable. And even then, I'd, as the only person in the world who uses this system of fingering, I would not want, I'm not happy using the fourth finger even in a chord on a white key. So that's that. And you might be thinking, you know, this is ridiculous already, that I'm presenting a system of fingering and I'm excluding the use of the fourth finger on white keys, and that it's already restrictive. And when you think of normal fingering, because you will probably feel a certain loyalty, or you'll be jumping to the defense of normal videos watching this video, of normal fingering watching this video. You might think that the Alan Cochlin fingering is ridiculous, that I'm an idiot. But I'll just, you know, you'll see, I'm going to compare it with normal fingering, and you can see how it's applied. You can see how radically it differs from normal fingering. You will see the logic, and you'll see the consistency. And I'm going to examine the two sets of fingerings from different aspects of it, so you can see how it fares up against normal fingering. So that's it. According to the Alan Cochlin fingering, the fourth key cannot, or the fourth finger cannot be used to play a white key. And there you'll see it there. There's a B. And that's it. Now, the little finger is best at playing white keys. And while it is not as bad at playing a black key as the fourth finger is playing a white key, it's not great. And since it's beside the fourth finger, which is the best finger of all the fingers at playing black keys, there's no finger, I guarantee you, if you, with the finger position that I've provided, if you have a black note to play and you want to play that as beautiful as possible, use your fourth finger, because that is going to achieve, every other finger will fall short of absolute beauty. The absolute beauty that the fourth finger can achieve on a black key. So the little finger, while it's not as bad on a black key, since it's beside the fourth finger, it'll be rarely used on black keys. And since it's so good, since the little finger is so good at playing white keys, it would be a waste to use it on a black key when you can use it on a white key. So it's only it's only the exception in terms of passages, runs, that you'd use the little finger on a black key. And any other time it would be in the context of harmonies, you know, chords and stuff, where there is no choice that you'd use the little finger on a black key. So the rule would be that the little finger is only used on white keys. And there you can see it there, the W on the little finger. Now the thumb. I have a W and B on the thumb. And the thumb, of all the fingers, the thumb is best able to switch position, the necessary position in order to properly play black and white keys. Since it only has two joints protruding out of the hands, the third joint is in the hand, whereas the other fingers have three outside. It has less to do in order to get in its proper position, and it can do it quickest, and it causes the least amount of tension to switch. So in terms of switching between black and white keys, there is no finger better at that. All the other fingers are slower to get into the position. They have a greater distance to travel to extend flat and to curve up again, whereas the thumb goes quickly. And that last joint on the fingers, it's not so flexible, so dexterous as that same joint on the thumb. So the thumb can be used for both. However, in the Alan Cochlin system of fingering, in terms of passages or runs or anything like that, the thumb will not be used on a black key. It's only in the rarest of circumstances that will the thumb be used on a black key in any sorts of passages. But given its ability to be able to switch position, the thumb is great for when you're playing octaves, for example, where in chromatic it can switch. It can properly play a series of black and white keys. So the thumb can be used for both. With the Alan Cochlin system, though, it's not used in passages. And for playing chords as well, you've got the same. There's the same idea as with the little finger and the fourth finger. Beside the thumb, you have the second finger. That is one of the two fingers that are best able to play black keys. So as long as you have the second finger there that could take the place of the thumb on a black key, even in chords, according to the Alan Cochlin fingering system, you would never favor the thumb over the index finger when you have the choice. Okay, so that's how the fingers work in the Alan Cochlin system of fingering, and that's this in the written out. That's how, that's how I represent that. And yeah, you might be thinking that it's way too restrictive, my system of fingering. And I'm gonna look at a few phrases, simple phrases, and I'll compare how they'd be normally fingered to the Alan Cochlin system of fingering, and you're going to see how it's applied. And I just want to say about, with the Alan Cochlin fingering system, the numbers the fingers are given the same numbers. The thumb is 1, etc. And I want to say something about the numbers, like those numbers assigned to the fingers. While they're useful for classifying the fingers, they do not represent the logical order of the fingers. And I think this is something it's misleading in a way, the idea of logic and what makes sense. That in maths or in counting, the numbers go 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and that's been developed, and maths represents logic. And so you have the numbers, and it's very often the thinking is that when you have 5 notes, that the notes are, there's 5 notes, 5 fingers, the fingers go 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So you play those 5 notes with those 5 fingers. And let's say you can, that it's not a trick like aha, but it's the end of a scale or it continues on. No, 5 notes in isolation, one after the other. They're all beside each other, and that's it. That's all you have to play with the normal logic. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notes. You play the notes with 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and it seems logical. And that's very often the logic applied, in fingering. If there's 3 notes, you use 1, 2, and 3, or you can use 2, 3, and 4, or 3, 4, and 5. But the way the numbers go, that's how you finger the passage or the phrase. But these numbers, the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in maths, they are representative of an order. They are not an order in themselves. They represent, and the order has to be found. The true order has to be found. Merely the numerical numbers themselves do not give something an order. And it's like so if you think about what is the true order of the hand, and in terms of logic, the fingers are given their numbers because of the position they have on the hand. The thumb comes first, and so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and that is a certain logic to ordering the fingers, but it might not necessarily be the true logic. And I think of, in this case, there's that commandment: I am your one true God, you shall not have false gods before me. Something like that. And I see that, first of all, I see that as being the most important commandment. And second of all, I see it in a metaphorical or a figurative sense. And I see that the goal or the guideline of that commandment is that you should not put something inferior on the top spot. Hold that in the highest regard. Because if you do, you're always going to, and if you worship that inferior idea, you're always going to be beneath that idea. So let's say if you might think that the printed score is the one true God, and that everything, all disputes, all questions about how to play, how to do anything, it's all the printed score has the final word. And if you hold that as the one true God and worship that, you are never going to rise above the level of that. So if it's not really the highest in terms of, authority, well, then you will never rise above that. And so the goal will be to find the one true God. So there is no ceiling to how far you progress, how far you develop. So the logical order of the fingers, they're numbered like that, but the numbering does not represent the logical order. The logical order could be in the length of the fingers. And so if you were to start with the smallest finger and progress, you would number it 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that's another logical ordering of the fingers. If you think of an intelligence test and they say put these things in order, and you have all different animals, one of which is a mouse and the other is an elephant, you might number them. The mouse give the mouse the number 1, and you'd end giving the elephant number 5, and you'd have passed the intelligence test. If you number the animals on the intelligence test as they appeared in the example, with the mouse, the elephant and the kangaroo and the dog, and you just gave them the numbers as they appeared, exactly as they appeared, you might not get the points, even though it is it's a logical way of ordering them. But there are other logical ways of ordering them. You could do it the reverse, where you begin with the longest finger, and that might be the true order of the fingers. Or you could number them 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 as they're numbered, only that your logic behind that is you number the thumb 1 because it only has 2 joints protruding outside of the hand, whereas the others have 3. So therefore, the thumb gets the number 1. And that's logic to the true logic to the actual hand itself, to the relationship the hand has to the piano. Whereas if you adhere to the idea that you follow, because the numbers go 1, 2, 3, and 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and that you're following a certain logic, it's like, I probably call it, that film with Russell Crowe, A Beautiful Mind. I might call it a beautiful mind logic. And it seems like logic, but in reality, the numbers, the numbering of the fingers, like I said, while it's useful for classifying the fingers, it might not represent the true order of the fingers. So, and the Alan Cochlin fingering does not adhere to the logic that because the numbers go 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, the fingers go 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That beautiful mind logic, the Alan Cochlin fingering does not follow that whatsoever. So I have I'm just going to look at the page, just because it'll be a lot of numbers. You're going to have to bear with me now. I'm going to compare normal fingering and the AC fingering. So on the one hand, you get an idea of how it's applied, and you'll see just how it performs against normal fingering. So the first phrase I'll use will be a 3-note phrase, C, D, and E. And if you imagine that, and I want to say that this is a phrase in isolation. There is only these 3 notes to play, nothing else. It's not in any other musical context. So it's an isolated phrase, and the notes of that phrase are C, D, and E. Now, normal fingering would have you finger that with 1, 2, and 3, most likely. And I want to say that in my whole piano education, I used normal fingering. I left college using normal fingering. So it's not like I'm some outsider who has no idea. I'm talking about my fingering system and I have no idea of your fingering system. I know your fingering system. If you're in college now, if you're ready to leave college or in your final year, you're at that same stage where I was while I was using normal fingering. So you can sort of think of yourself when you judge my knowledge of normal fingering. So the first phrase I'd take is this C, D, and E. With normal fingering, you'd finger it 1, 2, and 3. And you can that can be sort of verified when you look at the scale of C major, how that begins. The standard fingering that everybody uses, everybody learns, they begin the C major scale with the fingers 1, 2, and 3. So you would finger that normally 1, 2, and 3 if you had those 3 notes to play. Now with the AC fingering, the thumb, the middle finger, and the little finger are the fingers that are best able to play white keys. So you would finger those 3 notes. With the AC fingering, you would use the 3 best fingers at playing white keys for those 3 notes. So you would finger that phrase C, D, and E with 1, 3, and 5. And I just make an observation. So you can already see in the simplest of all phrases how the AC fingering system differs from normal fingering. And it's a combination. You see how little it adheres to that beautiful mind logic of the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Immediately it's unique. And I didn't develop this system of fingering for YouTube or for, a career or anything like that. I developed this system of fingering for myself, and I'm more than happy with it. And I use my system of fingering completely, and I'm not trying to get you to use the Alan Cochlin fingering. I'm just sharing it so you know about it. But this system of fingering, it makes me unique. It makes the way I play, the sound I get from the piano, completely unique. Nobody else in the world has this sound, because you'll hear later on with what Bach says, the influence fingering can have on your playing. And I think you'll agree that fingering can have an influence on the result of what you play. And that's been discussed. So I didn't develop it with anything in mind other than myself. And normally I wouldn't want to share this because it's what makes me unique. And so I have no interest in sharing it. I have no interest in anybody else using this fingering because it's mine. But you are welcome to use it now that I'm sharing it. But it is mine, and I didn't want to. And I guess, and I'm talking in piano terms, I guess the richer I become, the more I'm willing to share. So I am at a point where I'm willing to share this fingering. So according to the Alan Cochlin fingering, you'd finger that phrase with 1, 3, and 5. And if you think of playing that phrase musically, most likely, and it's a single phrase, most likely you're going to want to shape that phrase where it starts smaller, it grows in the middle, and it gets smaller again towards the end to create that arc. And with a proper arc with a beginning, middle, and end. And so you'll be giving the dynamics of that phrase, getting louder at the start, loudest in the middle, and dying off at the end. You will want to shape those 3 notes in that way. And when you compare normal fingering with the Alan Cochlin fingering, the normal fingering, you will be trying to shape those 3 notes with these 3 fingers and with this part of the hand, with 3/5 of the hand. Whereas with the Alan Cochlin fingering, you can shape those. You are using the entire hand, the benefit of the entire hand to shape those 3 notes. So I call it the width of the hand or the span. I don't know what it is, but you're going from one extreme to the other, from one side of the hand to the other, in order to shape those 3 notes. Whereas you do not, so you're employing the entire natural weight of the hand in order to shape those 3 notes. Whereas with the normal fingering, you're only using 3/5 of the hand. And I think it is the width of the hand, or let's say art. I see it in terms of, if you think of racing, you know, like Formula One. And if you imagine a normal person in a normal car driving normally, doing a lap of a Formula One track with normal speeds, normal everyday street speeds, they will be able to drive around the track, in the center of that track, and they can navigate the entire track, or the entire lap, staying in their lane. They don't have to use the space left and right of them on the track. They can stay completely in the center and drive around the entire lap. Whereas the Formula One driver, when they are on that track, they have to use every inch. In order to get their fast laps, they have to follow the ideal line. So they have to go from one extreme. They're covering the entire area of the track. They're taking a turn they start on the outside of the track. They go to the inside of the track on the turn, and then they come out on the outside of the track again. So they're crossing over they're maximizing the space of the track in order to get those fast times. And I see, in a certain way, I see the comparison between the normal driver and the Formula One driver is the difference between normal everyday stuff and art, and that the art is finding the ideal line. And so if you compare the normal fingering to the AC fingering, and if you consider the hand as being the track, the AC fingering is using the entire track, whereas the normal fingering is only using 3/5 of the track. They are not utilizing the entire track and finding the ideal line. So that's how I see it, and that's something that the Alan Cochlin fingering does there, in terms of applying the formula, because I applied the formula. The thumb, the middle finger, and the little finger are best able to play white keys, so they play C, D, and E. And in applying that formula, which makes this fingering an actual system, and they're not just patterns of fingerings, they're governed by a formula, this core formula that I've shared and I'm using now. In applying that formula, I am utilizing the entire hand in that, already in that simple phrase, and the results, normal fingering is 1, 2, 3. The Alan Cochlin fingering is 1, 3, and 5. The results differ enormously. It distinguishes itself significantly from normal fingering. So that's the one example. The next one, I take another 3-note phrase, D, E, and F sharp. And so normal fingering would have you finger that with the fingers 1, 2, and 3. And again, I refer to the D major scale, how that begins for everybody. It begins with the fingers 1, 2, and 3. Now with the Alan Cochlin fingering, since the thumb, the middle finger, and the little finger are best able to play white keys, and the second and fourth finger are best able to play black keys, I would use 1 and 3 on the D and E, and given the position of the black finger and that the fourth finger comes next and that is the best, the strongest of all fingers at playing black keys, I will use the fourth finger on the F sharp. So according to the AC fingering, you would finger the phrase D, E, F sharp with 1, 3 and 4. So, and I'll take another phrase. E, F sharp, G sharp and A. So a 4-note phrase this time. And normal fingering would finger that 1, 2, 3 and 4. 4 notes, 4 fingers. That's the beautiful mind logic. And of course, if it was to continue, if it was, let's say, part of the G major, E major scale, you would put the thumb on the A. But given that it's a phrase in isolation, you would use, normal fingering would most likely use 1, 2, 3 and 4. So with the Alan Cochlin fingering, the thumb, the second and fourth finger are best able of all the fingers to play black keys. And since there are 2 black keys in this phrase, and the thumb and little finger are best able to play white keys, with the Alan Cochlin fingering system, you will play the E with the thumb, the F sharp and the G sharp with the second and fourth finger, and the A with the fifth finger. So normal fingering, that phrase E, F sharp, G sharp, A would be fingered 1, 2, 3 and 4. With the Alan Cochlin fingering system, it will be fingered 1, 2, 4 and 5. And I'll take a last phrase with F, G, A, B flat and C. Now normal fingering would have you play that phrase with the fingers 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. 5 notes, 5 fingers. And again, I refer to the F major scale. And since it's a phrase in isolation, you wouldn't cross the thumb under. Again, you'd use the fifth finger. With the Alan Cochlin system of fingering, the thumb, the middle finger and the little finger are best able to play white keys. And since the fourth finger is best able to play black keys, I would use the fourth finger on the black key. And given its position, I'd use the third finger on the A and the little finger on the C. And I'd use the thumb, since it's best able to play the white key, I'd use the thumb on the F. And since the second finger is almost as good playing a white key as it is playing a black key, and since there's room now, given the position of the black key in this phrase, and there is now room between the thumb and the middle finger for the second finger, I will use the second finger to play the G. So with the AC fingering, you would finger that 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, the same as normal fingering. But you can see the application of the formula is different. It's governed by a different principle than normal fingering. And that would be generally a rule maybe of the AC fingering, is that when there's room between the thumb and the middle finger, then you use the second finger on a white key. When there's no room between the thumb and middle finger for the second finger, like you can see in that phrase with D, E, F sharp, there's the D with the thumb, the E with the third finger, and the F sharp with the fourth finger. There's no room for the second finger there. You don't use it. But when there is room, with the F, G and A of the last phrase before you play the black key with the fourth finger, well then you do use the second finger, since it can be played, it can be used to play both black and white keys. So that's how you apply the AC fingering system when fingering those phrases. And so if you now take those same phrases, C, D, E, D, E, F sharp, E, F sharp, G sharp, A, and F, G, A, B flat, and C, if you join them together now, and now it's one passage with those notes in it. And if you keep the same fingering, which would be the case, I mean, with normal fingering, you would probably, when that appears in a passage, you would finger it 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And the same goes for the AC fingering. You'd finger it the same as you'd finger the phrases individually. So what you end up with the AC fingering is 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, 4, 1, 2, 4, 5, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, and you might look at the normal fingering and see it 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and admire its elegance and the logic of it, the simplicity and the beauty of it. You know, and like I said, a beautiful mind logic. You can, you know, we can have piano students and professors writing on the Windows pane those fingerings out and admiring them. Oh, it doesn't matter. And the Alan Cochlin fingering looks 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, 4, 1, 2, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It looks like the fingerings of a lunatic. So I just want to look at that. Just examine those fingerings for those phrases from different aspects. And so you might be thinking, you probably are thinking, that since the Alan Cochlin fingering excludes the use of the fourth finger on white keys and doesn't encourage, or basically excludes the use of the little finger on black keys in passages, that it discriminates too much, it's too restrictive, and you're going to end up with like tying yourself just with an unnecessary, it's like you're playing the piano with two fingers tied behind your back. And that the normal fingering, which you might feel a loyalty, that the normal fingering, that there's no restrictions, no such restrictions, so you are a lot freer, you've got a lot more options available to you using the normal fingering, and that the normal fingering is superior by far to the Alan Cochlin fingering system. So I just want to say a few things about those phrases when you look at the two sets of fingerings. With the normal fingering, you use the thumb 4 times in total. You use the second finger 4 times, the third finger 4 times, the fourth finger twice, and the fifth finger once. With the Alan Cochlin fingering, you use the thumb 4 times, the second finger twice, the third finger 3 times, the fourth finger 3 times, and the fifth finger 3 times. So you can see from that the fingers are much more, the notes are much more evenly distributed among the fingers with the Alan Cochlin fingering than with normal fingering. So that's the one thing. If you look at it as well from this point of view, Chopin in his sketch for a method, he characterized the fingers and he called the third finger the pivot. And so I'm going to call it the pivot 2. Just like Chopin called it the pivot. And if you look at, with the normal fingering, the pivot is used 3 times. And with the Allen Cochlin fingering, no, the pivot is used 4 times. And with the Allen Cochlin fingering, it's used 3 times. And if you look at the pivot with the normal fingering to the left of the pivot, the fingers, the combination of the fingers in total, of how often the fingers is used, in total is 8 times. And to the right of the pivot, the combination that those fingers used in total is 3 times. So what you have is 4 in the middle. To the left you have 8 times those fingers are used to the left of the pivot. And to the right of the pivot, those fingers are used in combination a total of 3 times. With the Allen Cochlin fingering, the pivot is used 3 times. To the left of the pivot, the combination of those fingers to the left of the pivot are used a total of 6 times. And the fingers the combination of fingers to the right of the pivot in total is as well 6 times. So to the left and the right of the pivot with the Allen Cochlin fingering, you are using those fingers 6 times each. So you have 6, 3, 6, as opposed to normal fingering, which is 8, 4, 3. So there you can see that the Allen Cochlin fingering, not only is it more evenly distributed, despite those restrictions that you might, despite those restrictions, the fingers are more evenly distributed, and as well, it's more evenly balanced when you look at it in that way compared to normal fingering. Now, there's another aspect I wanted to look in comparing those 2 fingerings, and that is those fingers that have to alternate between black and white keys. And if you've seen my video on the cause of tension, it's explained there that alternating the fingers between black and white keys is the real cause of tension. And now I don't need you to agree with that for this video. But what I will say it in the terms that are undeniable for everybody, which they must be, that when you think of the movement of the fingers, and this has it doesn't have to have anything to do with tension. If you think of the movement of the fingers, one movement I think which everybody will agree on that the fingers have to do is depressing the keys. And I think everybody will agree that moving the hand left and right along the keyboard is performed, that the arm does that and not the fingers. And regardless of finger position, of anything like that, another movement of the fingers will be, given that the black and white keys are on a different level, they have a different position on the keyboard, that when you play a black key and then you play a white key with the same finger, regardless of what finger position you prefer or you think is the right one, that finger has to move in order to play both keys. It's undeniable. So essentially what you have is 2 movements for the finger. One is the depression of the keys, and the other is moving it so it can play a black key and a white key. Whether that causes tension or not, you don't have to agree with me. That's irrelevant, but you must agree with me that the finger needs to move in order to play a black and a white key, given that they're not on the same level. So, with normal fingering, when you play those phrases in a row, all joined up, you have to alternate fingers between black and white keys 5 times. The second finger you have to alternate twice. The third finger you have to alternate twice, and the fourth finger you alternate once between black and white keys. With the Alan Cochlin fingering, when you apply the formula and use the Alan Cochlin fingering, you only have to alternate the second finger once in that entire passage. And if you look, you have to alternate the second finger in the third phrase, the E, F sharp, G sharp, A, you're playing the F sharp with the second finger. And in the final phrase, you're playing the G with the second finger. So you have the space of 3 notes in order to change the position of the finger so it can properly play the G. Whereas with the normal fingering, if you take the second finger, the first time, or let's say the third finger is the first one to alternate. So the finger in the first phrase, the third finger plays the E in normal fingering. And then it has only the space of 2 notes in order to change position, in order to play the F sharp. So with the Alan Cochlin fingering, while you do have to alternate one finger once, there's a space of 3 notes separating that necessary alteration. And you'll see when you compare it to normal fingering, you have to alternate the fingers between black and white keys 5 times. That's 5 extra movements, or 4 extra movements, considering you alternate once with the Alan Cochlin fingering. That's 4 extra movements that your fingers have to perform in order to execute the same passage. So it's not as efficient. Normal fingering demands more movement from your fingers than the Alan Cochlin fingering demands. So that's another way of looking at it. With the Alan Cochlin, with the normal fingering, when you take those 4 phrases, when you play them using that normal fingering, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, you're using the entire hand once in the execution of that passage. With the Alan Cochlin fingering, you're using the entire hand 3 times, a total of 3 times in order to play it. And the one time you're not using it in the D, E, and F sharp, you're using 4/5 of the hand. So you're using a greater width of the hand in order to shape those 3 notes than the normal fingering, which is only using 2/3 of the hand. So with the Alan Cochlin fingering, the amount of hand you're employing in order to play those notes is by far greater than what normal fingering facilitates. Yeah, so that's the first example in applying Alan Cochlin fingering system, and the first comparison to normal fingering. So the Alan Cochlin fingering, in the context of this example, first of all, it differentiates itself significantly from normal fingering with 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 normal fingering. Alan Cochlin fingering is 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, 4, 1, 2, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's very different. It turns out the notes are more evenly distributed among the fingers with the Allen Cochlin fingering than they are with normal fingering. Left and right at the pivot, the fingers are, it's balanced. It's completely balanced with the Allen Cochlin fingering, 6 on each side of the pivot, whereas normal fingering there was 8 times on to the left of the pivot and 3 times to the right of the pivot. So it's imbalanced normal fingering, whereas the Allen Cochlin fingering is perfectly balanced. The Allen Cochlin fingering utilizes the entire hand. Again, you don't have to agree with that's an advantage or not an advantage, and that the entire hand, using the entire hand to shape a 3-note phrase, if you think that has a 0 advantage, it doesn't matter. The fact is, the Allen Cochlin fingering utilizes the entire hand 3 times in order to execute those notes, whereas the normal fingering used it once. So that's the comparison. So that's the AC fingering, and you could then try it all in a phrase, and for the sake of finishing it off, you could at the end, after you play the F, G, A, B flat, C, then go back down again to the F. That's it, and you could compare it to normal fingering and see how the two compare. And I don't know how fast you need to go, but that's it. Given the length of the video, I'm going to continue the rest in the next video. So thanks for watching.